Like many properties in France, this estate, Chateau Riffet's, has seen better days. We were joined by two other couples, one from Chicago, Americans, and the other from Paris. The couples had met through an exchange program with their sons, much like Martha's exchange with Anna in Italy. The grounds of the chateau are well kept. Alain and Marie grow almost all they eat. They are nearly vegan. They have no one to succeed them at Chateau Riffet except their daughter, who lives 15 minutes away in Caen, but they rarely see her. The home didn't appear over-furnished to us, yet Alain indicated, somewhat facetiously, he would love to send a shipment of furniture to North America, probably in preparation for eventual sale of the estate. Both here and in Burgundy our hosts had very good English, so we did what we could to draw them out in conversation, and what emerges is a sense of resignation, ennui, an acceptance that their elegant family histories and privileged lifestyles in these grand houses must yield to the economic necessity of taking in travelers like us to help with the bills. Our guide, Christophe Rolfe, met us at the chateau on the morning of the tour at 9 a.m. sharp and was delighted to sit at table for breakfast with the eight of us, including Alain and Marie. It was evident from the get-go that this guide, cum teacher of Italian to Frenchmen, was extremely knowledgeable about all aspects of the Normandy invasion. Moreover, 90% of his clientele are Americans wishing to visit Omaha and Utah Beach. He was delighted to spend the day with us at Juneau. Apart from having details of all 9 companies of Canadian regiments of the 3rd Canadian Army that participated in D-Day, all off the top of his head, he could even talk about individual officers. Christophe carried with him a book of original photos of the sites that we would see, now greatly transformed from June 6, 1944. For the investment of €300 for the day, driving around with a D-Day expert in the comfort of our own car was absolutely fantastic.
Hitler's Atlantic Wall stretched some 6,000 kilometers from Norway to the tip of Spain. As in Normandy, it was divided into sectors. Juneau was WN29.
The marvel of German engineering, which is carried through to automobiles and manufacturing today, was certainly in evidence in 1944. These bunkers contained guns, and rather than facing the sea, the guns faced parallel to the beach. They faced each other. The reach of a gun shooting cartridges 88 millimeters in diameter and pivoting 180 degrees would be deadly to any armored equipment passing between it and the next gun emplacement. The range of these guns is about 2 kilometers. Thus the Allies would have to run a gauntlet after hitting the beach. The construction was equally impressive, a German feat of engineering. Thick poured concrete walls. We're talking 8 to 10 feet of concrete reinforced with iron rebar. The thickest part faces the sky and the sea, impossible to be knocked out by aerial bombs or by artillery fire. The occupants of each bunker had to be neutralized, as Christophe had put it, i.e. dislodged with hand grenades and hand-to-hand combat by troops crawling on their bellies along the beach amidst swept by withering barrages of machine gun fire. What was on the previous slide was the largest bunker for a gun emplacement that we saw. It's not buried in the sand, but it had tilted over in the sand dunes over the years. See how little damage was inflicted by Allied heavy artillery fire, just a few bits of concrete chipped away at the front. This monument that you see here is a tribute to the Canadian infantry brigades that were among the first ashore at Juneau on June 6, 1944. They were the Royal Winnipeg Rifles and the Canadian Scottish Regiment at Grey-de-Sur-Mer. Each of the 5 Allied landing beaches was in turn subdivided into sectors known as Mike Red, Mike Green, and Mike White. There was consistency with this ordering on each of the 5 Allied beachheads from east to west. An interesting anecdote emerges from my reading of the book entitled Juneau by Ted Barris. Barris speaks of the first actual film footage of the landing to be flown back to North America within a few hours of D-Day. The film was shot by a Canadian non-combat military unit that had been specifically assigned to photography. The company was commanded by one Colonel Richard Malone. Dick Malone, subsequently in peacetime, became the publisher of the Globe and Mail and the boss of Barb's dad in the late 1970s. The footage that was shot on a landing craft behind soldiers disembarking was shot with a camera mounted on a tripod. There were no handheld cameras in those days, so it was very tricky in the moving seas to get footage that was clear. However, it did show troops landing, and it showed Canada House, still standing today on the Normandy beach. The film ran in all the movie houses as reels, as newsreels in New York and around the world. But not a single mention was ever made that these Allied troops making the landing were Canadians, not Americans. Very interesting. How about that German engineering? These are two remaining examples of many cast concrete structures known as hedgehogs. Hedgehogs were set close enough together on the beach that armored personnel vehicles and tanks would have a tough time getting past them. Note the shape, a triangle, with a low center of gravity, very difficult to turn over or move by any number of soldiers. Soldiers already encumbered with 50 or 60-pound backpacks of equipment. Note also not much cover for a soldier, standing, sitting, or crawling. Nowhere to hide to avoid machine gun fire. So it was incumbent on the Canadians who made it ashore to crawl on their bellies and get as close to the bunkers as they could, to lob in hand grenades and attempt to neutralize the Germans before they could kill more Canadians. The Canadian Juno Museum on the beach is a splendid memorial. It's manned by 18 to 25-year-old Canadians who get to spend a 4-month tour of duty at the museum while enhancing their knowledge of French. The kiosks to the left were the idea of the families of the soldiers who landed and were entirely financed by personal contributions that the museum got to launch. Towards the end of the reign of the Liberal government, the Chrétien government actually was embarrassed enough to come up with some money for the museum. And of course, the Conservative government since has been very committed to honoring Canada's military past. No surprises here. Trudeau would have nothing to do with war and remembrances, being an elitist Quebecer, not wishing to remind other Quebecers that they rioted in the streets against conscription and the war. There was one Canadian regiment out of 9 that participated in the Juno assault. There was Québécois, but it was not one of the primary landing forces. Of course, the Royal 22nd, the famous Vendeus, served well and honorably in Italy and in Sicily and elsewhere, so that the French-Canadian role in World War II can't be overlooked. For some reason, I am missing the photo of Charlie. Charlie is a tank similar to this one, except Charlie had a short snout because he was meant to fire mortar shells at smaller German gun emplacements. We saw Charlie earlier, but further west along the beach. Charlie was not always Charlie, but was renamed Charlie in honor of one of its 4 occupants who died when the tank came ashore and sank in the soft sand before seeing any action. It's quite curious that as we were inspecting Charlie earlier in the day, a British man in his 70s or so stopped to look as well. He mentioned that he was part of the group over from England who had worked with German engineers to actually raise Charlie out of the sea and sand in 1975 so that it could be restored and put on display. He noted that he found some pretty unsavory things when they opened Charlie after all of those years. I had expected to hear about the bones of the real Charlie, the gunnery officer, but no, they found cartons of cigarettes and packages of condoms by the hundreds that were coming ashore with the landing force. This was another impressive bunker, thick concrete walls protecting its occupants from the sea and sky. The large 88mm gun on a turret could cover a range of 2 kilometers along the beach in both directions. This is the place where the Queen's Own Rifles, the Toronto Regiment, faced in their landing sector.
We visited one of the Canadian cemeteries. It was enough. By no means a tourist trap, the whole of Normandy region remains to this day keenly aware of the Canadian contribution to their freedom. There are signposts at the entry and exit of every village with a Canadian flag on the sign. Had we more time, I would have liked to have visited the German cemetery, which is also in the area, honoring the German Wehrmacht soldiers who fell in battle.
The actual landings on Normandy Beach began just before dawn on June 6, 1944, and were fully coordinated amongst the Canadians, the British, and the Americans. Each of the five beach landings, Omaha, Utah, Gold, Juno, and Sword, had different terrain and different obstacles to overcome. All were difficult beyond belief. However, by the end of the first day, Canadian forces had captured their objectives and had penetrated further inland than any other Allied soldiers. Driving the roads from the beach to where the Canadians ended up by midday, June 6, 1944, we found the great distance they covered hard to believe. Besides encountering resistance, many of the soldiers were on foot, carrying these 60-pound equipment backpacks as mentioned. And they were dead tired after combat and having virtually no sleep the night before being embarked on ships in England. Barb's camera stopped working and my cell phone camera lost its battery power by the time we got to the Ardennes Abbey. I suppose it's just as well because it was here on August 16, 1944, 2 months after the landing and a couple of German counteroffensives, that a company of North Shore Regiment, the Nova Scotians, were captured and held prisoner. The German infantry and panzer divisions had lost a lot of capacity in the 2 months after the Normandy invasion and had called up a regiment comprised of the Hitler Youth. These were very young but well-trained and highly indoctrinated young Nazis who had been recently put under the command of Colonel Kurt Meyer. The sad ending of this story is that the young German soldiers began drinking before dawn the next day and had summarily executed all 27 Canadian soldiers one by one in the garden of the Abbey. After the war, Kurt Meyer was extradited to Canada. He was tried for war crimes, but not convicted, on the basis that there was no proof he had given the youth regiment any direct orders to kill the Canadian soldiers. These facts are covered in the aforementioned book that I mentioned, Juno, and were remarked upon by our guide, Christophe. He framed it actually as a tribute to the Canadian system of justice, which requires proof, beyond a shadow of a doubt, for the conviction of a capital crime. Lest we think badly of the Germans, I think it must be said that war crimes were committed on both sides. It is the losing side that often gets written up, and the German regular soldiers, the Wehrmacht, the Luftwaffe, and the Navy, were disciplined troops who followed the Geneva Convention for proper treatment of prisoners. The SS troops and Hitler Youth, not so much. And the Gestapo, well, they were not soldiers at all, but ruthless counterintelligence thugs